Hi guys, thank you so much for your patience. My sincere apologies. I couldn't go live due to some technical glitch. So I take the next few minutes to answer the all three questions rather, because most of you seem to have wanted me to focus on all three questions. So just to reiterate what the questions were, the first question was, what can a coach do to get the athletes full focus during training? The second question was, what can a coach do to channel the athlete's anxiety into drive or a fighting spirit? And the third question was, what can a coach do to enhance athlete's self-confidence? So let me tackle the self-confidence question first, because I believe this is one of the, if not the important, but one of the most important psychological aspects to an athlete. So what are some ways a coach can do or rather enhance the athlete's self-confidence? The good news about the coach-athlete relationship is that the athletes know the coach very well, but more importantly, the coach seems to understand the athletes better than they understand themselves. But more than often, in my experience at least, what I've seen is most athletes are not aware as to exactly what the coaches think about them, especially in terms of their strengths. So there's a little activity you can do in order to manage this. So what you could do is you can get your athlete to come up with a list of the strengths the athlete believes in. So basically, when the athlete is coming up with this list, you want to encourage your athlete to look at 4 different aspects to it. So first, the physical aspect in terms of skills, in terms of physical fitness. So what does your athlete believe are the athlete's physical strengths in terms of skills and fitness? The second aspect would be the tactical aspect of it. So to your athlete, what does your athlete believe are his or her strengths in terms of tactics? The third would be the psychological aspect. What are some things the athlete believes psychologically he or she is strong in? And last but not the least, you want the athlete to look into self-care. What are some things the athlete is already doing in terms of self-care, in terms of perhaps taking care of their hydration, taking care of their nutrition, making sure whether they are sleeping enough or not, etc. Right? So this gives you a global perspective of what an athlete thinks in terms of what they're good at or what is going good for them. Now, while the athlete is doing this, you also do the same activity for the athlete. So in your opinion, what are your athlete's strengths, or what's going great for your athlete in the 4 areas we just mentioned? Physical skills, inclusive of technical skills, inclusive of physical fitness. Psychologically, what are your athlete's strengths? Then tactically, what are your athlete's strengths? And in terms of self-care, what do you believe the athlete is good at in terms of taking care of themselves? So once these lists are done, you want to take a look at what the athlete has written about himself or herself. And of course, you want your athlete to take a look at what you have written about your athlete. And then also compare the 2 lists. Now, through this exercise, you get a deeper, understanding of, or a deeper perspective of what your athlete thinks about what they're good at, what they're doing right. And then, of course, the athlete also gets to understand what the coach is thinking about them. So once this information is sought, and once you compare the 2 lists, I can assure you there could be some discrepancies in what is written there. So there may be some aspects of the athlete's technicality, for example, or tacticality, for example, or psychological aspect, for example, which the athlete does not believe they have, but the coach thinks they has it. So in my experience with the coaches I've worked, I've always seen, and through my discussions with the coaches, I've understood that in most cases, if not all, the athletes do not have a full understanding of what the coach believes are the strengths of the athletes. Because more than often during a coaching process, the coaches are very focused on what's going wrong, what needs to be improved, because that's the whole idea of coaching. The whole idea of coaching is filling the gaps, making corrections, becoming better. But in the right intention the coaches have to help the athletes improve, they get too busy correcting the athletes. They get too busy focusing on the mistakes the athletes are making. And they might come across as highlighting the negatives only, right? And because the athletes trust you, because the athletes see you as an expert in whatever you do, the athletes, irrespective of verbally or non-verbally, they agree with you or not, inherently they start believing that this is what it is, that their skills in whatever area that is requires a lot of working, and perhaps they're not very good at it. So through this exercise, like I mentioned before, it is a very interesting experience where the athletes actually get to see how much more the coach thinks about their strengths, how much more the coach believes in the abilities or capabilities the athletes have than they originally thought, right? Now, while you're doing this activity, you want to make sure that you do not quote any example in terms of, okay, you have this, you believe you're strong in this, oh, your teammate also thinks that way. So do your best not to discuss anybody else when you're discussing your athlete. Why? Because it's very important for the athlete to know that you are focused on them while you're discussing on them, and whatever you've written about them is something you truly believe in. And I'm so sorry, I forgot to mention that when you come up with the athlete's strengths, you want to be very, very honest. You don't have to sugarcoat things. You don't have to write a strength you believe the athlete does not have just so that your athlete feels better. You might think the trick works, more than often it doesn't, because the athletes understand you much more much more you think they understand you. And the worst thing you want to happen is where you come across as, saying lies just to make the situation pretty. You don't want that to happen, right? And once this is done, and once the strengths are discussed, now it is very important that you take the focus of your athlete into things that need to be improved, because coaching is about that, training is about that. When we train, we are striving to be a better version of ourselves, to be better at what we do, perhaps in terms of making the skill more fine, more reformed, more clean, more neat, or perhaps in terms of the other skills the athlete might have to learn. So how do you go about that? You do exactly the same, like the way you went through making a list of your athlete's strengths. You do the same with a list of what your athlete needs to improve on. Now, do your best to reframe from using the word weakness, because the word weakness has a negative connotation to it, right? And it might not be the best way to move forward, having a discussion of weaknesses. So how about calling that, something you need to improve on? So the same way, you and your athlete make a list of things in the 4 areas: physical skills, physical fitness, psychological aspects, self-care, and tactical aspects. So what are some things that need to be improved in these 4 areas? Once the lists are ready, you do the same drill. You take a look at what your athlete has written, the athlete takes a look at what you have written, and then you compare and contrast, right? Again, like I mentioned earlier, do not compare your athlete with anybody else. Don't even quote examples, good or bad, right? Because this time with you is for that particular athlete, and you want the focus right with the athlete, right? And moreover, by comparing an athlete to another doesn't serve any purpose at all. Now, let's say you want to compare your athlete to their idol, to a teammate who respect. You don't have to do that. They're already doing that themselves. But the moment you compare them, in other words, you're telling them that this athlete is lesser than the athlete that you compared this athlete with. It doesn't feel great. Really, it doesn't work, right? So since it does not serve any purpose, why do that? Yeah. Okay. Now that's one good exercise you can do. And then it's also important that you help your athlete understand, or bring to your athlete's understanding, that looking at both strengths and weaknesses during training is super important. You look at your strengths, you feel good about it, and you look at weakness is not the word, what needs to be improved on, and you work on it. But anytime closer to the competition, say a week or two before, or if it's a major competition, at least a month before, right? And during the competition, the focus has to be only on the strengths. Why? Because you want your athlete to be thinking about what they already have, and not think about what they don't have or still need to improve on. If that is the mindset, focusing on the strengths, this is exactly what your athlete will focus on the day of the competition or during the competition, tournament or match itself. You need to do the same too. As much as possible, you do not want to talk about or highlight what needs to be improved. Now let's say your athlete is pitted against, or is competing against a very strong athlete. So let's say the opponent has 100 skills that can be very, very helpful for them, right? But your athlete has about 10 skills only. Well, that's a fact. The fact is that your athlete has these 10 strengths and the opponent has 100 or rather 90 strengths more, or 90 skills more than your athlete. Can you do something about it during competition? You can't. How then does your athlete still feel confident going into the competition? Very simple. Both you and your athlete need to recollect, reflect on what is working for her or him, what they're good at, and the focus or the goal during the competition should be to be able to use every skill they have to the best of their ability, such that after the competition or match, the athlete knows they couldn't have done better, that they gave it their all, irrespective of what the scoreboard shows, irrespective of whether there was a win or loss. Very, very important. So having that feeling that they couldn't have done better, having the feeling that they gave it their all is very important. Now what happens if either you, your athlete, both of you kind of choose to focus on things that you need to improve on around the competition time? This will serve as a very bad distraction. This will induce a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of self-doubt. This will also get your athlete to compare themselves with the opponents. Look at the strengths of the opponent rather than looking into what they're capable of. Either which way, a distracted mind, a distracted focus is not going to allow anyone to be their best, right? So how about just letting go of what needs to be improved on around match time, around tournament time, and just focusing on what can be done with what the athlete has. Along the way, perhaps, when your athlete is striving to be their best in their own way, based on the strengths they have, they might just realize that they have much more to them. So the attitude is full of motivation, nothing to lose. Full of motivation, why? Because you're focusing on your strengths. The athlete is focusing on what can be done. Nothing to lose, because your athlete already knows this opponent is very, very strong. So there's no point actually focusing on the outcome. Ideally, when the athlete and the coach needs to be focusing on the outcome of a match or a tournament is during training. During training is also when you look at the opponents, you look at the strengths, and you look at what you can do to outshine them. What can you do to outdo them? But during competition, it's all about what you can do. How you can exploit your opponent's weaknesses, for example. How you can use what you already have to be your best. When you are your best, the scoreboard will tell you where exactly you are. You are in terms of the athlete. So the athlete is anyways gonna get a correct feedback of where they stand in a bigger scheme of things in comparison to their opponents, correct? So self-confidence, there's so much you can do regarding self-confidence, and these are just two of the many things you can do which I've talked about, right? Yeah. So let me move on to the second question. So the second question, or rather one of the three questions, was what can a coach do to get the athlete's full focus during training? Very important as well. Now, and why is it important in the first place? By getting your athletes full focus during training, you are ensuring that every training counts. Every minute that is spent during the training is working towards the improvement, the betterment for your athlete, or rather of your athlete. So how do you do that? We all know, I mean, not just psychologists, coaches also know that to be able to perform optimally, being present during the time of performance, focusing on what they're doing, is very, very important. So how to be able to focus and be present 100% during performance starts building up right from training. So during training, if your athletes are able to focus 100%, then chances are they're going to emulate the same behaviors during competition as well. So I have a few ways where you can actually do this, a few very simple ways. One of the ways is, like, to include your athletes' input into the training calendar, into what you plan to do during the training for that particular session, or for that particular week, for that particular month. So by involving your athlete into the conversation, you're also getting them to understand your rationale, your reasoning behind why you have designed the training program the way you have designed, correct? And sometimes coaches, or rather most times as coaches, you do assume that what you think is what works for the athlete is what you have to do during training. But by involving your athlete, you could also get their own perspective on what's working during the training. So that's a benefit as well. Now that you have included your athlete in your training, in drafting your training program for the day, for the week, right? The athlete is now clear about what to expect during a specific training session. What more can you do? Just before the start of a training session, take a few minutes. It takes like sometimes less than 2 minutes, really. So take 2 minutes to get your athlete to set some goals for that training session, now that your athlete knows what the training session is about. So let's say that particular day, let's take an example of a tennis coach. Let's say for that particular day, your focus is basic rallies and working on your athlete's second serve, right? So now your athlete is aware of what the training program is like, what it entails. Keeping this in mind, your athlete can then sit down for a minute or two and think for themselves, what does your athlete want as an outcome out of these training sessions, right? In terms of the second serve, what does your athlete want out of this training? Is there a specific aspect of the tennis serve which they want to improve? In doing so, you're already drawing the attention of your athlete and focus into the training session. You have a plan, your athlete has a plan based on your plan. This allows your athlete to look forward to what's being done, to keep a tab on how it's progressing, and check for themselves whether this particular training session is working towards their goals or not. If it works for their goals, they'll stay focused. If it doesn't, perhaps they will tell you that it's not working, right? Okay. Now, the second aspect. Now, you have a goal for the training program. Your athlete has his or her own goal based on the plan you have for the training. Now, let's say you've decided on getting your athlete to do about 100 serves, the second serve practice. So, one of the ways to make this practice effective, and also one of the ways to get your athlete's full focus into those 100 serves, is to do it a little more smartly. So just before your athlete makes that serve, get your athlete to visualize that serve. Let them run in their mind exactly how they want to make the serve. Right from how far behind they want to stretch their arm, their racket, how far high they want their racket to go, where exactly they want the ball to meet the racket, how much power, how much effort, or how much energy they want to put onto hitting the ball, where exactly on the court, on the opponent's court, do they want the ball to go and land, and things like that. Now, I'm not a tennis coach and I don't do much of tennis, so I don't know much about it. You'll know the specifics. So get your athlete to visualize exactly what they want out of the serve they're about to make, and then get them to do it. Now, because they've already visualized, they benefit in many ways. They're now very clear exactly how they want things to do. And then because the visualization has already happened, they're already in the zone. So there's very little room for distraction, very little room for division of attention or concentration, right? And once they make this serve and follow through with it, they know how exactly they're visualized, what they actually did. If there's a discrepancy, they can try and see how it needs to be corrected. And in worst case, if they're struggling, they can look up to you. They can ask you for a suggestion. Perhaps they will ask you to actually demonstrate it for them, or give them a feedback of whether they're exactly doing the way you're expecting them to do. So, not just focus, visualization has a lot more benefit to it, but it can certainly be used to maintain your athlete's focus during training, right? Okay. And then, just to talk a little bit about visualization, it is also known as imagery. So, visualization has the power to improve the muscle memory, to create a stronger blueprint in the mind of the person on how they want to do a certain action or a technique, right? So not just focus, but imagery and visualization can help them a lot more. I'm very tempted to go talk about a little about the different theories of imagery, but I think perhaps today is not the best time because I still have some more things to cover, perhaps in the future, right? And let me know through your comments if you would be eager to know a little more about that. Then, the second thing you can do is encourage them to have instructional self-talk. Now, self-talk is a terminology that is used for any thought that comes to your mind, right? We all do self-talk. We are always talking to ourselves. But if we can plan what we want to tell ourselves, then it can work towards helping us focus, right? So encourage your athlete to use instructional self-talk, words, phrases, sentences on their own, whatever they want to tell themselves, that instructs them exactly what to do next, that guides them through the processes of what they're doing. So as long as they're engaging in the instructional self-talk, their mind is busy focusing on the task at hand, focusing on specific cues that are relevant to the activity they're doing. In doing so, there is no scope for their mind to get distracted. There's not much scope for their mind to get divided on the attention, right? So instructional self-talk is one of them. Now let's say we are looking at a basketball coaching situation and your athlete is working on a free throw perhaps. So how many bounces does your athlete want to make before the before the three-pointer, perhaps 4 bounces, right? And perhaps your athlete wants to look straight into the basket, adjust their body position in a certain way, adjust their palms in a certain way, hold the ball in a certain way, and then make the shots. Instead of a visualization, they can actually run themselves through the process of it. They can have a self-talk like, okay, find a center of gravity, bounce 3 times, hold position, point at the basket, throw. So this is just an example on how I would have done it. But your athlete will know what works for them. Now, when you're encouraging your athlete to come up with self-talk, instructional self-talk, it is best for us as psychologists and coaches not to provide the self-talk they're supposed to be telling themselves. Self-talk is always best or works best if it comes from the athlete themselves, because they know best what works for them in terms of the self-talk itself, right? Now, another thing that can be done is to get them to have a routine they follow at the start of the training, during the breaks, during the training. Let's say your training is 2 hours long, and let's say the plan for that particular training is to give them a break every half hour. So we are talking about 3 breaks in between the session, and there is the start of the session. So if they can have a routine which they always do, day in and day out, every single training they do, it becomes a habit. And if the routine is specific to their sport or the activity they are about to do, for example, fastening their laces, tying them properly, right? Checking on their sports gear if things are in place, going through a specific warm-up routine, irrespective of how late or how early they are. They must do those. Let's say you have 5 exercises for their warm-up. They must go through those 5 exercises. So something they follow every single time they go into training. This helps them to actually start focusing their mind towards the training itself. And as a part of this routine, you can also include their goal setting. Remember earlier we talked about how having the athlete to set a goal of what they want to achieve for that training session based on your program for that session is very important. This goal setting process can be a part of this routine. Okay? So when that happens, your athlete is entering into the zone of training focused on very sports specific, sports relevant cues, sports relevant stuff, right? Now, will it take their mind away 100% from distraction? Perhaps not. But it can keep them more than 70% for sure. And through the training, like we've discussed, there are other, like for example, visualization and instructional self-talk that can keep them going. Now, why is it important to do this? Our athletes are pretty young. They have a life other than that of an athlete. They're somebody's child, they could be a sibling, they're a friend, perhaps they're a girlfriend or boyfriend if they're dating someone, perhaps they're a spouse if they're married, perhaps they're a parent if they already have kids, they're a student, perhaps they're an employee if your athlete is working, perhaps they're a grandchild. So there's so many selves to your athlete other than the athlete self. And this is that one human who has so many selves to them. So the need to get your athlete to focus during training is to help them take on completely or prioritize the athlete's self during that training time, during that time that's precious for them. And owing to the different selves and owing to the different relationships they hold in their life or responsibilities they have, there could be so much going on in their life, good and bad, which can be distracting. So by engaging in a routine, it allows them to kind of drop the baggage, positive and negative, that comes from other roles they play in their life, and as much as possible submit to the training session they're about to take part in. In doing so, they involve themselves completely. In doing so, they make the best of the training session there is. And I'm sure you would not complain of an athlete who's very, very focused and very, very involved and invested in the training session. So these are some of the ways where every training session can count for you and your athlete, just by using some simple methods of getting your athletes to focus on what they need to focus, right? Last but not the least, I would like to focus on how to help your athletes channel their anxieties into drive or a fighting spirit. Now, we all agree that being an athlete is never easy. Competing is never easy, right? It is bound to bring about a lot of anxiety, over-arousal, stress, etc. But then that's going to be there as long as your athlete believes that they are playing competitively. Stress, over-arousal and anxiety is not going to leave them. But that is also the good news. So when your athlete is anxious, it's good news, because this talks a lot about the intention of your athlete to be able to do something as an athlete. It talks about their interest in what they're partaking in, which is the sport. It is also a good news because anxiety talks about their motivation as well. If your athlete is very relaxed all the time, and I'm not talking about the mental calmness, but I'm talking about the low motivation kind of relaxation, that is not good news. But if your athlete is a little over anxious, that is good news. And that is why it's so much more easier to channelize that very negative anxiety into a positive one. So how do you do that? A good start would be to let your athlete know that you feel that the athlete is actually very anxious, right? And let them also know that it's okay to feel anxious. It's very, very normal. Even an Olympian feels anxious, irrespective of all the training they do, all the preparation they do. And anxiety is actually good to have, right? But over anxiety might not be the best thing, because over anxiety takes away your power to be your best. Because over anxiety can bring about a lot of negative thoughts in your mind, which can be such a bad distraction. Well, there's no good distraction. A distraction is a distraction, but it's a bad distraction in the way that it takes a lot more than a positive excitement being a distraction. So how does a coach go about helping an athlete convert or see a very negative anxiety into, convert it into a fighting spirit or drive, right? So as a coach, it becomes very important for you to know where your athlete's anxiety is coming from. So ask your athlete, why are you anxious? What is getting you anxious? Sometimes it is possible that your athlete doesn't know where the anxiety is coming from, right? So maybe you want to prod a little bit. What are you worried about? So ask them questions that's going to elicit information. More than often, anxiety comes from low self-confidence. It comes from low self-belief, right? So asking these questions helps you understand, of course, where the anxiety is coming from. So let's say your athlete tells you that they're not feeling good, not feeling confident, not feeling well prepared. They've been doing the same mistake again and again during training. So let's say that's the situation. So what do you do then? You then take your athlete's attention to, okay, now that you're anxious about this, which is a good news, which talks a lot about your intention and motivation to be better, what can we do about it? Throw this question to your athlete. So what can we, coach and you, do about it? Obviously, when there's self-doubt, the focus is on the things that needs to be improved on. So quietly take your athlete's attention to what can be done in terms of what can be improved, right? And get your athlete to write a list of what needs to be improved. And get into the next step. Now that these are the things that needs to be improved, and this is what you feel about them, what should we do in order to improve them? What can be done during training in order to help you get better at what you believe you are not good at? Correct? Is there something more you can do other than training time alone that you can improve on this particular aspect? Right? So keep in mind that only very motivated athletes more than often are the one who feels very anxious. Only those athletes with the intention to excel, intention to be better, intention to do well become anxious because they're very worried that their intention might not come true, that their hope, their goal might not see its day, right? And bring the attention back every single time during every single session. Always remember, if you're anxious, it means to say you're motivated. It means to say that you have an intention to improve. So the more you keep telling this to your athlete, this is what your athlete starts believing as well. Now, people who are very stressed have a lot of frustration and anger in them. Very good. So these people need avenues to actually release that anger, release that frustration. Extend the training time a little bit. If your plan is to have 100 serves for that particular training day, how about making them 125? Giving them 25 extra. It works on making them better at their serves. It serves the purpose in terms of their self-confidence, from which their anxiety could be coming from. And research has it that physical exercise is very important in managing stress, because exercise releases or encourages our brain to release certain chemicals that are responsible to alleviate our mood, to improve our mood, right? So there are so many things that can be managed just with this issue of anxiety. Okay? And then the next step. Now that you've talked about where the anxiety is coming from, now that you've talked about what can be done during, or rather what needs to be done differently, or what can be done better during a training session that can help them improve in the areas that they're very anxious about, of not performing well, it is good to also know from your athlete what could be some roadblocks, what could be some hindrances, what could be some barriers that are not allowing them to be at a level that they hope to be, in terms of improved technicality, in terms of improved skill, in terms of improved tacticality, in terms of improved fitness. So very important to know this, because not two athletes have the same journey. And as coaches, we might think that we know a lot about the athletes, but perhaps we don't know what's happening in the athlete's current life. Or perhaps we have overlooked something. Or perhaps our athlete has never shared aspects of their life that could be major hindrances. So by taking the focus of your athlete into what the roadblocks are, of course you get them to reflect on what the challenges are. But more importantly, when they share the challenges with you, you want them to also reflect on of the challenges they have shared with you, or of the roadblocks or hindrances or barriers they think that are coming in the way of them being better athletes. What are some of these that are controllable by them? And what are those that are beyond their control? So very, very important, or rather most important, to take your athlete's attention to this aspect of the challenges they're facing through. Because athletes and coaches, all of us face challenges, but not everything can be managed by ourselves. All of them are under our control. So in doing so, you then actually dividing these challenges in perhaps in two halves or whatever the proportion is. And then highlight to your athletes that there's no need, or rather there's no benefit in focusing on challenges which they cannot work on, in working on challenges that they have no control over. So by not focusing on it, it saves your athletes a lot of energy. They can now use that mental energy, physical energy, to focus on what needs to be done about the challenges, right? So these are some ways you can channel your athletes' anxieties into a drive or fighting spirit. Yeah. Now I'm about to end my session, but before that I would like to say none of what we discussed about, helping your athletes focus better, helping your athletes improve on their self-confidence, converting your athletes' anxieties into a fighting spirit or drive are going to work if you don't practice the same qualities. The athletes are watching you. So it's very important that you walk the talk. In fact, when the coaches have these qualities in themselves, more than often, they might not have to specifically teach these qualities or discuss these qualities obviously to the athletes. The athletes observe you. The athletes are watching you. And they're certainly gonna model after you, imitate these qualities. So I can't stress enough on the fact that coaches need to change their mental habits, their behaviors, if they want certain behaviors to change in their athletes, right? So I want to end my conversation here. Thank you so much for your attention, and please give me a feedback on what you found useful, and more importantly, please also comment on what are some things you have been doing and working for you, because really I would also like to learn from you. Thank you.